Good evening and welcome to all. Tonight's class is graciously dedicated in tribute to Ida Schattenstein with much respect and appreciation by her husband, David Schattenstein. They tell the story once again about the Jew from Chelm, traveling once on a train, a long journey. He asks the conductor to wake him up at 4 o'clock a.m. because he must get off at 4:15 a.m. The conductor assures him that he will wake him up, and the Chelm Jew takes off his clothes and goes to sleep. In the same cabin, there was also a Russian general who also decided to retire and get a good night rest on the train. He also took off his clothes and went to sleep. 4 o'clock in the morning, the conductor wakes up the Jew from Chelm. It's pitch dark in that section in the train. So when the Jew puts on his clothes, by mistake, instead of putting on his own garments, he puts on the clothes of the Russian general and his uniform. He gets off at his stop. He comes home. His wife greets him, opens the door, takes a look at him. Yankel, you went mad? Du bist Meshiga geworden. What happened? Take a look in the mirror at what you look like. He takes a look in the mirror and he sees, a ganze charmant, a Russian general. He turns to his wife and he said, I always said that those Russian conductors are schlamazels. He woke up the Russian general instead of me. The challenge of many a person to confuse his or her garments and substitute them with his or her very identity. And we are not only addressing physical garments, but more importantly, psychological and emotional and cultural garments, and also physical garments. And that ability to mistake myself for my clothes and my clothes for myself is a challenge that plagues many an individual, and it's one we wish to address this evening. We are going to explore a mitzvah at the conclusion of the portion of Bamidbar and dissect it from two perspectives, two different dimensions. This evening we will meditate on two interpretations on a mitzvah at the end of Bamidbar presented by two sages of our generation. The first perspective presented by Rebbe Soloveitchik, Rabbi J.B. Soloveitchik, at a sermon, a speech he presented on Shavuos, 1956, in the Moriah Synagogue in the Moriah Shul in Manhattan. The second, a perspective by the Lubavitcher Rebbe, presented at a Shabbos gathering, Shabbos Bamidbar Tovshin Chavhei, the Shabbos of the portion of Bamidbar, 1965. The conclusion of Bamidbar relates how God, Hashem, communicates to Moses the following commandment. When the tabernacle, the sanctuary, needs to be transported from one location to another location in the desert, obviously there were certain individuals who were responsible to carry the various pieces of furniture of the Mishkan of the tabernacle from location to location. Levi, the third son of Jacob, had three sons, Gershon, Kahas, and Merari. This was the family known as the Leviim, the Levites. They were charged, among other things, with the mission of transporting the entire Mishkan from location to location. But while the other two brothers, Gershon and Merari, were designated to carry the outer parts of the sanctuary, the pillars, the curtains, the coverings, and so forth, it was the family of Kahas, the Kahasites, who were responsible to carry the most sacred items of the tabernacle. They were the ones who would transport the most sacred pieces of furniture from the sanctuary from one location in the desert to its new location in the desert. And thus, God tells Moses that before the Kohasites come to carry the sacred items and transport them during the journey in the desert, Aaron and his children, the family of Kohanim, the family of priests, first needed to come and wrap up and cover up these items. Only after Aaron and his children covered and wrapped these items can then the members of the Kahas family come in and begin transporting them. One of the children of Kahas was a man named Amram. Amram, of course, gave birth to Aaron, to Miriam, and to Moses, to Moshe. Aaron and his family were chosen as the Kohanim, the priests. Aaron and his 4 sons, Nadav, Avihu, Elazar, and Isamar. Nadav and Avihu died prematurely. Aaron remained with his 2 sons, Elazar and Isamar, as the Kohanim, as the priests. Till today, the descendants of Aaron and his children are the Kohanim we have today in Israel, among the Jewish people. So Aaron and his children, the Kohanim, the priests of Israel, they were the only ones who can come and actually wrap up these items. 5 sacred items are discussed at the conclusion of Bamidbar. Number 1, the Ark, the Aron, in the Holy of Holies, containing the tablets engraved with the 10 Commandments. This was the first vessel, the Aron. The second, the Shulchan, the table upon which lay the showbread. Third, the candelabra, the menorah. And then 4 and 5 were the 2 altars, the golden altar upon which they would burn the incense each morning, and the copper altar, the Mizbeach HaNechoshes, upon which they would offer the sacrifices. So we have the ark, the table, the candelabra, and the 2 altars, or the Aron, the Shulchan, the menorah, the Mizbeach HaZav, and the Mizbeach HaNechoshes. Aaron would come with his children, they would cover up these items, wrap them up, and only then can the members of the Kahas family come and begin to transport them. Now, if you look in your curriculums, source number 1, right below the video, there's a curriculum. We quote there the last verses of the portion of Bamidbar, where the warning and the caution is presented in very stringent terms. God speaks to Moses and Aaron and he says, Al tachrisu es shevet mishpachos hakahasim etoich halavim. Make sure that the Kahas family does not get cut down from among the larger Levite family. V'zois asu lahem v'chayu v'lo yamusu. Begishtam es kodesh hakadashim. This is what you should do to make sure that they live and they don't die. He continues, Aaron and his children should come and designate who will carry what. V'lo yavayu lirois kevala es hakodesh v'mesu. They, the members of the Kahas family, should not come and gaze as the holy items are being covered. Kevala es hakodesh, as they're being swallowed and covered, lest they die. They must only emerge after the 5 above-mentioned items have been covered already. And only then can they begin carrying these items on their shoulders from location to location in the desert. How did Aaron and his children cover them? What was the method employed to cover these items? On this, the portion of Bamidbar tells us that for each of these items, a minimum of 2 layers, 2 coverings were used. The first is the covering called Beged Tchelis, a garment made of turquoise wool which was dyed with the turquoise color. Above it, there was a second covering, a second layer, made from Ur Tachash, the hide of an animal called Tachash. There was an animal with the Jewish people in the desert. The animal has since become extinct. It was called the Tachash animal. And from the hide of this animal, they made a second covering with which these holy items were covered. Now, when you read the portion, you see there were some changes. Some of them, 2 of them had a different covering, but they had a minimum of 2 coverings, and usually it was these 2. the covering from the tcheles, the turquoise wool, a garment of turquoise wool, and the covering of the tachash. In the ark, it was the other way around. The lower covering was the tachash covering. Above it was the covering of the turquoise wool. Let's take, for example, two of the verses. You have it again in your curriculum. Pasuk Hey, chapter 4, Pasuk Hey. Perik Dalet, Pasuk Hey, and Vav, chapter 4, verses 5 and 6. Uva Aaron uvanov ben Esaya hamachane v'yiridu es pareches hamasach v'chisu bas Aaron ha'edus. Aaron and his children come when they have to travel. They take off the curtain, separating the Holy of Holies from the Holies, and they cover with it the ark, which is understood because the curtain also had to be transported, and it was part of the furniture in the Holy of Holies together with the ark, so they put it over the ark. V'nosnu alav kisu yor tachash. On top of that, they placed a covering made of hide of the tachash animal. Ufarsu, and above that they spread out beged, a garment, klil tcheles, completely made of turquoise wool, milmoila above it, v'samu badav, and they fixed its staves, its sticks, the staves on the ark with which the Kohanim carried the ark and transported it. And then the Torah continues how they did the same with the other four sacred items. Again, a minimum of 2 layers, the tachash covering and the covering of the turquoise wool. And the question, of course, is what was the significance of these 2 coverings, of these 2 layers? And why were these particular layers chosen? Why the need to make the garment out of turquoise wool, not any other material, and the second covering to be of tachash hide? What is the symbolism? What does it represent? What is the rationale behind it? There is a discussion among commentators, but as I said, tonight we want to meditate on 2 perspectives presented by Rabbi Soloveitchik and the Lubavitcher Rebbe, with some additional sources from other books and other elements of Jewish literature that I will attempt to present this evening to you. This tachash animal was an interesting animal in the sense that the Aramaic translation for tachash is sasgoina. And as you'll have in your curriculum in source number 3, the Talmud says in Shabbos, the Gemara in Shabbos, page 28, Chav Ches Amud Aleph, Amar Rebbe Yosef hainu sasgoina shesas bigvan harbe. The tachash is joyous. It rejoices in its many colors. The tachash hide, the tachash fur was unique in the sense that it was like a mosaic which combined many different colors. It was beautiful. It was extremely attractive and appealing. The diversification of colors is what made the tachash hide unique. How about tcheles, turquoise wool? What is tcheles? We know about tcheles because it was a major component in the construction of the tabernacle of the sanctuary. We have tcheles mentioned in the mitzvah of tzitzis. The Torah tells us in the portion of Shlach that when we make tzitzis out of tzitzis, of course, the fringes, each of the 4 corners, we place the fringes, the tzitzis, made of wool. And within that, there has to be a cord. V'nosnu al tzitzis hakon of psil tcheles. There has to be a cord, a thread of tcheles. Tcheles was wool, but it was dyed with a special dye, a brilliant blue and greenish color we call today turquoise. The dye was made from the blood of a fish called the chilazon fish, which appears very rarely in the Mediterranean. And in Jewish tradition over the generations, Jews stopped using tcheles because they could not identify any longer the fish. I should mention in recent generations, it became quite a lively and controversial subject when the Radzine Rebbe, Zichroina Levracha, claimed to have discovered the chilazon fish at the shores of Italy and reintroduced the tcheles into tzitzis, and many Jews today wear it, but it was a major dispute and many others did not accept his proposition that he rediscovered the tcheles, the dye with which to color the wool and use for tzitzis. There is something unique about chelas. To put it in the words of the Rambam, and you have it in your curriculum, Maimonides in the Laws of Tzitzis, chapter 2, hat chelas ha'amura b'tzitzis. The chelas dye which the Torah discusses concerning tzitzis tzarich shetehei tzviyasa tzviya yedua b'shoimedes b'yoifya v'loy tishtana. It must have a fixed color which retains its beauty and never changes. In other words, in addition to the nature of the color, that bluish-greenish color representing a beautiful blue ocean, the beautiful blue heavens. The identifying mark for tchelis is its constancy. The fact that the color remains on the wool, on the material, and does not change. In fact, as the Talmud explains in Tractate Menachos, Daf Mem Gimel, page 43, and you have it in your curriculum, it was common for thieves, for crooks, to counterfeit chelas, because you see, to get the chelas dye is a very rare phenomenon because it's a fish, and the fish comes up rarely. But there is a nice substitute. It's called in Hebrew kla'ilon, indigo, which of course you could make from the true indigo plant, much easier to make, much more common, and it looks just like chelas. We call it indigo, like the blue jeans. And the indigo is called kla'ilon, and you can easily substitute it with turquoise, with tchelas. And the rabbis knew that there were people who would do that. It was a great business. Jews needed tzitzis. Bring in the indigo, the true indigo plant. You don't need tchelas. It looks just like it. So the rabbis gave us identifying marks to be able to distinguish between tchelas and kla'ilon, between turquoise and indigo. And one of them is Ifrid Chazuse Posel. The indigo dye comes off from the stuff, from the material that's dyed with this color. Tchelas doesn't change. So you had to take the tchelas wool, the wool that was dyed with tchelas, and you soak it in colors, and you submerge it in chemicals and in heat and under the sun. If it was indigo, the color changed. If it was tchelas, it retained its identity and did not change. Now you know it's tchelas. Here then, we have the first dimension in explaining one of the symbolisms behind this mitzvah. When you want to transport the ark from one place to another place, representing the long journey of Judaism, of Torah, in a long and difficult desert. Because the journey of the Jewish people, 40 years in the desert, essentially, was the prototype of the journey of the Jewish people for thousands of years through the tumultuous experiences that they endured through long years of exile, often with savage persecution and suffering, or other types of challenges. But it represents that long journey of the Jewish people carrying their tradition, carrying their sanctuary, their table, their candelabra, their altars, and their aron, their Torah, their ark with the tablets of the Ten Commandments. Can we carry the ark successfully? What are the ingredients needed in order to transport Torah, in order to ensure Jewish continuity, in order to make sure that in the long journey through a long and barren desert, and often a very difficult and challenging desert, we can still retain the freshness, the vitality, the spark, the consciousness of Torah? How do we transmit it from parents to children, to grandchildren, to great-grandchildren? In a word, how do we carry these items, these sacred vessels, beginning with the ark, through a desert? And the Torah says, you need two ingredients. You need the tachash. You need the covering of tachash, of the hide of the tachash animal. And you need the garment made of tchelas, of turquoise wool. The tachash has two elements, two symbolisms. Number one, it represents diversification, diversity. It didn't have one color, it had many colors. This represents what our sages tell us, shivim panim laTorah, There are 70 layers to understand Torah, which means there's no one color to Torah. Every soul has its music. Every soul has its unique way of experiencing God and experiencing Torah. As long as the Aron is covered by its own curtain, by its own parochas, which was the first thing Aaron used to cover the ark with, the parochas, with the curtain, separating the Holy of Holies from the Holies. As long as it's within the context of authentic Torah, there are many colors, many songs, many experiences, many dimensions. God is not defined by one color, one experience, one level, one faculty, one attribute. How does the verse say in Tehillim? King David says, Ani yadati ki gadol Hashem v'Adoneinu mikol ha'elokim. I know God is great. The emphasis is not only I know God is great, I know God is great. I know it in a way which is different than the way you know it. My calling is not your calling. The note that my soul represents in the divine symphony is different than your note. Together, we create a larger melody, but everybody has their contribution, their mission, their calling, their strengths, their challenges, their virtues, their flaws, and therefore their way of experiencing godliness, of experiencing Torah. Rabbi Isaac Luria the Arizal takes it a step further. He says every verse in Torah has not only 70 perspectives, it has 600,000 perspectives. Because there are 600,000 Jewish souls, and every soul has its own interpretation. The 88 or 84 keys of the piano lend themselves to infinite compositions. Same keys, you don't have to change the keys. It's the same keys, you don't need to invent new keys. But the very same keys, when Mozart sits down by those keys, one ballad comes out. When I or you sit down by those keys, another type of song comes out, if any. Same keys. Many different colors, many different compositions. Sometimes we feel threatened when somebody doesn't look like us. Somebody doesn't come from the same community like us. You have to appreciate the tachash, the larger inclusivity of Torah and of the Jewish people, which encompasses so many different types of people, so many different types of experiences, so many different types of dimensions and colors. That's one element in the tachash. But there is another symbolism behind the tachash, equally critical if you want to be able to carry the ark, to carry the Torah from one place to another place throughout our long journey in exile in the desert. And this has to do with the fact that Torah has so many colors and nuances and details, and they all comprise to become the hide of a singular animal. Sometimes people over the generations have felt, I would like to pick and choose. Some elements of Judaism make a lot of sense to me. I appreciate them. I even love them. I understand their value and their significance. But then there are other elements of Judaism and Jewish law that just don't talk to me. I see them as maybe irrelevant or monotonous or insignificant or sometimes even worse, as ridiculous. And therefore I'm tempted to pick and choose and embrace this dimension of Judaism and reject another element of Judaism. There are those who say in the famous expression of the Midrash, Dein hanyan lei v'dein lo hanyan lei. These components I appreciate and I like, these I don't. Let's take Shabbos for an example. There have been Jews who have appreciated the beauty of Shabbos, the sanctity of Shabbos, the aesthetical elements of Shabbos. They wanted Shabbos, but they didn't like everything about Shabbos. Why do I have to keep Shabbos the way it says in Shulchan Aruch, in the Code of Law, the way it's articulated in the Tractate Shabbos? I love the Kiddush, I love the gefilte fish, I love the singing, I love Shul. But do I really have to be meticulous about fulfilling the Isser, the prohibition of Haitzah, of not carrying on Shabbos, of Havara, of not lighting a fire on Shabbos, of Kibui, of not extinguishing a flame on Shabbos? Let me choose and pick, reject some and embrace others. And yet history has shown that this type of Shabbos, where you took some elements and you threw out other elements, did not have that power to be retained and transmitted to children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. On Shavuos, there is a custom in many Jewish communities to learn the book of Rus. That famous book in the Tanakh, Rus, about that widow, about the widow Naomi who loses her husband and 2 sons, who intermarried with Moabite girls, Rus and Arpa. Arpa goes back after the death of her husband to her ancestors in Moab, to her family, her non-Jewish family in Moab. Rus, however, decides she wants to follow her mother-in-law Naomi back to the Holy Land and become a Jew. And in those moving words in Rus, you have it in your curriculum. You can open up your curriculum. Rus tells her mother-in-law, Ki ela asher telchi elech, wherever you go, I will go. Basher talini yolin, where you lodge, I will lodge. Amech ami, your nation is my nation. Ve'elakayich elakai, your God is my God. Basher tamusi amos, where you die, I will die. V'shamek kaver, and there I will be buried. Comes the Talmud in Shraktet Yevamis, and the Talmud tells us, again, you have it in your curriculum, that there was a deeper conversation going on here. Naomi is telling Rus, you have to realize, Asir lon Tchum Shabbos. If you become Jewish, you have a problem with Tchum Shabbos. There's a prohibition on the Jew to walk on Shabbos outside of a city. If you leave the city, you can't walk more than 2,000 amas, around 3,000 feet on Shabbos. It's part of the tranquility, the rest of Shabbos. As long as you're walking in the city, it's fine. But once you reach the borders of the city, you're walking in open ground, parks, wilderness, forests, and so forth, highways. You can't walk more than 2,000 amas. This is called Tchum Shabbos. So Rus tells her mother-in-law, wherever you go, I go. You don't walk Tchum Shabbos, I don't pass Tchum Shabbos. Next, Naomi tells her, Asir lan yichud. We have a problem of yichud in Jewish law. A man and a woman, if they're not married to each other, or they're not from the same family, cannot be locked up exclusively in the same room with a locked door where nobody can come in. It's called yichud. You sure you want this for your life? And Ruth says, Basher talini alin, wherever you lodge, I lodge. Naomi tells her, Mefakdin on sheish meyes v'yud gimel mitzvahs. We have 613 mitzvahs. And Ruth says, Amech ami, your people is my people. Naomi says, Asilan avodas kechavim. Idolatry is prohibited by us. And Ruth says, Elekayech Elekah, your God is my God. Naomi talks about the 4 penalties of death of court. And Ruth says, Basher tamusi amos. And so forth. Now I want you to reflect on this for a moment. In the same verse, they talk about Tchum Shabbos and they talk about Avodah Zarah. They talk about not walking an extra foot on Shabbos and pagan idolatry. In the same verse. Because Judaism is tachash. It's a holistic, organic symphony, which includes many nuances, many details, many dimensions. And Rus understood that to be able to be a Yid, to be able to experience Yiddishkeit, to be able to give over Yiddishkeit, to be able to have the ark traveling for thousands of years, through the most excruciating and difficult circumstances. You need the hide of the tachash. You need the multi-dimensional components, qualities, and colors of Yiddishkeit. Judaism. There's a fascinating Talmud, fascinating story in Tractate B'chayres, Daf Hey Amud Aleph, page 5a, you have it in your curriculum. Shal Kuntrukus Hasaris Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. There was a Roman minister. His name was Kuntrukus. And he once asked Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, the great Talmudic sage, and his question was, he went to the Chumash, he went to the Bible, and he saw that Moshe, fundraised silver for the sanctuary. But when Moshe gives an account for the silver, it's clear that he took more than he gave back. What he took from the Jews, some of it is not accounted for. So he asks Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, tell me, Moshe Rabchem Kubyustus Haya Ganav Haya Ene Baki B'Cheshbainis Haya. Moshe, your teacher, was he sadistic? Was he a thief? Or did he simply fail math in school? And Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says, Moshe Rabbeinu gizbar nemen hayo baki b'cheshbonos. Moses was a loyal treasurer and he knew numbers very well. But the problem is, as the Talmud continues to explain and Rashi explains, there is that verse in Pekudei that Kuntrukus forgot, quote unquote. Ve'es ha'elef u'shva'meyos v'chamisha v'shivim asavavim la'amudim. There was 1,775 silver shekel coins. A particular particular currency with a particular silver weight. 1,775 such coins which Moshe collected from the Jewish people. And he used them as hooks. He turned them into hooks for the pillars of the sanctuary. The sanctuary had amudim, and on top of those amudim there were hooks. Vavim in Hebrew. And that's what he used a lot of the silver for. Kuntrukus did not account for that silver used for hooks. Moses did. Why? Rashi, other commentators say he just ignored it because he was just trying to tease Rabbi Yochanan. And he knew the truth that Moshe wasn't a thief. He just tried to tease him. But there's another symbolic explanation. This was one of the great differences between the non-Jewish world and the Jewish world historically. Kuntrukus, like many other cultured Gentiles, could not understand why Jews make so many sacrifices for details. Why does Judaism not have a system of dispensation like the Catholics have? Sometimes the Jewish student comes to his professor or his dean in college and says, I can't take the exam on Shabbos. I can't take the exam on Yom Tov. And the professor says, why can't you get from your rabbi a dispensation for one Shabbos? Why can't he give you all for one Shabbos? The Jew is sometimes traveling, he's stuck in the airport, there's nothing to eat, kosher. He wants to eat something. Why can't Jewish law give him a dispensation just for one day, for a few hours, to eat treif, to eat kosher? Why does Judaism have so many details and so many nuances about almost every aspect in life? I can appreciate the pillars of the sanctuary, many say. I understand that Judaism has foundational pillars which create its majesty, its philosophy, its theology, its perspectives. The pillars of kindness, of grace, of love, of compassion, of charity, of philanthropy, of monotheism, of a basic system of morality, ethics, the value of family and education. I even appreciate things like Shabbos and holidays in general terminology. But why the vavim? Why those little hooks on top of the pillars? I need the pillars. Who needs the hooks of the pillars? And when we look at these pillars, we ask, was Moses sadistic? Were the rabbis and the sages throughout the generations fanatical? Or simply did they not understand some basic things about life? They didn't know cheshbonos, they didn't know numbers. Why did they allow Knesset Yisrael, the community of Israel, squander energy, resources, time, intellectual creativity for small things? Netilas yadayim, washing your hands before you eat bread. Eruvei chatzeris, when you want to carry from one yard to another yard. Eruv tavshilin, when you want to cook from Yom Tov for Shabbos. The laws of Nida, the colors of blood. The details of tzitzis and tefillin and the laws of Shabbos and the laws of muktzah. Why the need for details? Kuntrukus did not count the silver on the hooks of the pillars, only the pillars. And he comes to the conclusion there is a fanatical system here. But it becomes more dramatic because the rabbis tell us, the Medrash says, and you have it in your curriculum, that Moses himself forgot what he did with the rest of the silver for a moment. You remember we discussed this at length in our class for the portion of Pekudei here on the yeshiva.net. The Medrash says, Shachach elef u'shvameis v'chamisha shivim v'shekel sha'asa vavim la'amudim. Moses forgot the 1,775 shekel which he used for hooks for the pillars, his chilyoisha v'tama. He began wondering what did he do with them, the Yalkut Shemaini says in Pekudei. And what happened? At sheheir HaKadosh Baruch Hu es einav v'ra oisam vavim la'amudim shoyu meirim kakei balayla. God illuminated the eyes of Moses and suddenly he saw little vavs, glowing like stars in the night, and he realized that this is what he used the remainder of the silver for. What does this represent symbolically? Sometimes we ourselves wonder, did Judaism not assemble too many stringencies, too many details, too many dimensions over the years? The pillars would have been enough. Why the need for the vavim, for those little hooks? Why the need for the shach and the taz and the magen avram and the beit heitiv and the pischei tshuva and the bakiva eger? Until Moses' eyes opened and he saw that the little vavs were glowing like stars in the night, and then we realized the answer. What allowed the Jewish people to glow like stars in the long nights of exile? It was not only the pillars, it was the hooks of the pillars. It was the tachash. It was the nuances of halacha and the full holistic melody of Judaism that retained the sanctity, the wholesomeness, the harmony, and the unity of Yiddishkeit. It's like a singular symphony. If I decide one day, I don't like a part of the symphony, I'm going to cut it out. You don't like it, you're struggling with it, I appreciate and respect your struggle. But you cannot change the symphony, because if you cut out one part of the melody, the danger is that the entire melody will be tarnished. And when you want your children to accept the melody after you have already cut part of it, it's not the same music, it doesn't have the same power, doesn't have the same integrity, doesn't have the same holiness, it doesn't have the same divinity. If it's true in its totality. And if a part of it is not true, then it's very difficult to expect that the next generation will choose the part which we chose voluntarily. They may reject that as well. Rus and Naomi understood this well. If you want to hold on to Avodah Zorah, you must hold on to Tchum Shabbos. Parsha telchi elech, where you go, I will go. Ubasher talini yolin, where you lodge, I will lodge. Then your nation will be my nation, and your God will be my God. There is the second component, and this is the tchelos. To be able to carry the ark from one place to another place, you need a garment of tchelos. What is tchelos? We said before, once the dye of the turquoise becomes one with the stuff, with the material, you can't change it. It becomes so entrenched, so engraved. You put it in the sun, you put it in the heat, you put it in chemicals, you put it in hot water, you put it in other colors, and you let it soak, and the tchelos remains. What the Torah is telling us here, if you want to be able to transport the ark through the desert of history, you will have to be able to cover it, number one, with tachash, remembering the diversification of Judaism, appealing to different souls. Number two, you'll have to remember that it's a holistic melody and symphony. It's organically connected. The 613 mitzvahs are intertwined and interwoven with each other. You can't pick and choose. But you must remember also the tchelos. And that is, the Jewish people will have to demonstrate an unwavering connection to Torah with consistency, and with perseverance. The relationship, the knot between the Rebbeinu Shalom, between God and the Jewish people, between Torah and the Jewish people, is going to have to be like tchelos. Once you put tchelos in the wool, it never leaves. It remains entrenched and ingrained. The secret of how Judaism was transmitted through the generations was that the Jewish people had a loving commitment, a mesiras nefesh, a sacrifice for the holiness of Israel, for the holiness of Torah, for the holiness of Judaism, to the point of unwavering loyalty. As Ruth says, Hamavis yafrid beini ubeincha. Only death will separate between you and I. Just as the color of tchelos cannot be torn out, uprooted from the garment, there was no force in the world that can take away the Jewish people from Torah, the Jewish people from God. This, the tchelos, was then the real fortress that allowed that connection between God and the Jew to remain as powerful as ever, which is why the tzitzis, which represents that knot between God and the Jewish people, has to have the tchelis inside, the turquoise inside. For Judaism to survive, children, grandchildren, friends, communities have to be able to see in parents commitment, resolve, consistency. Only that which we are ready to sacrifice for will our children make their own for real. Only that which is really one with us. Only that which we live with in a very deep way. It's not showbiz. It's not when I'm in the mood of it. It's part of my essence. And wherever you put me, it will not change. The tchelis won't leave. Sometimes you're in the sun, it's a hot day. Sometimes it's a cold day. Sometimes you're submerged in different elements, different environments. But tchelis is not superficial. It's not skin deep. It's entrenched. It's engraved. Yes, it's easier to find indigo, kla'ilon, a dime a dozen. It's easy to find the superficial Judaism that works in good days when you're comfortable. Why not? But the tchelis is rare. It's a rare color. It comes up in the fish and the chilazon very rarely. Today, it's even very hard to get that type of tchelis. But if you want the ark and the other vessels to survive that transportation in a barren desert, you need the tachash and you need the tchelis. And now we come to the second perspective presented by the Rebbe, by the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And here we enter from the macrocosm into the microcosm, from the historical and theological into the emotional, psychological, and spiritual and personal. What is interesting is that throughout this portion of Bamidbar, the Torah refers to the tchelis as a beged, as a garment, to the tachash as a michse, as a covering. In other words, the garment made of the turquoise wool is defined as a garment, like the garment which dresses the body. The covering of the tachash hide is defined not as a garment, but as a covering, which means it did not necessarily match and was not custom made to suit the dimensions of the vessel, but it was just a general covering with which they wrapped up that particular item. Now, in most of them, besides the ark, you first put the turquoise garment and then above it, the tachash covering. What this represents is every human being, essentially, is a tabernacle, a mishkan, a sanctuary where God dwells. There is godliness, the light of God within every person. Every person has a soul. Every person is a soul. It's not just you have a soul, you are a soul. You have a body. And the soul is a chelik elokamimal. The soul is a fragment of God, so to speak, a spark of God, a piece of God. And the fragment of God is dispatched to a foreign planet to introduce the holiness, the light of God into that planet. But our inner tabernacle, the fragment of God within the human being, which resides in the depth of our psyche, in the depth of our heart, is often eclipsed by a minimum of 2 layers. The first layer can be defined as a garment. The second layer ought to be defined as a covering. The first layer with which the tabernacle items were wrapped represents the body and the physical consciousness of the human being. The body may indeed be made of tchelis, of turquoise wool, reflecting the color of the blue heavens, the luminescence of the heavenly bodies. We're dealing with a disciplined body, a trained body, a cultivated body, not a crass and brute and gross body. The body can indeed serve as a garment which expresses the soul rather than a facade which disguises it. But yet, our bodies are brute by their very nature. Our physical existence makes it difficult to access our God-centered space. So our sanctuary, our mishkan, where God dwells, like in the sanctuary in the desert, is covered. It's covered by a garment which may suit the soul and even express it somewhat, but it's still a covering, it's a layer. It's hard to access God within yourself, your soul. There is a second, far denser layer. It's made of colorful animal hide, and it represents a second layer which covers our soul. This is known as the Yetzer Hara, the negative inclination, and other environmentally harmful forces. These forces, just like the second layer of Tachash hide, are very colorful. They're very attractive. They appeal to our eyes, to our appetites, to our senses, to our instincts, to our cravings, to our aspirations. The peace of God at the depth of our heart is veiled and disguised by a multitude of colorful dispositions, inclinations, habits, cravings, and so many other potent forces which can repress our authentic human and Jewish core. The Tachash hide often speaks in the name of cultural diversity, of experimentation with so many things out there in the world. It speaks in the name of tasting of the forbidden fruit, and often things that seem so colorful and appealing, and yet often these colors, rather than express, only eclipse what our soul needs. They eclipse the truth of the human being, the depth of the human being, the dignity of the human being. The colors of food, the colors of money, the colors of different types of appetites. These are the second layer that can eclipse the soul. And there comes a point in life where one turns to himself and to God and bemoans the paradoxes of human life. Why are there so many superficial colors which can distract me, which can take me away from my soul? If my essence is really a piece of God, why is it so badly hidden behind so thick a facade, many a person asks. In other words, both the spiritual and the material paths in life, the religious and the secular, if you wish, can drive you berserk. A life without God, one can live, but it's so much more superficial or shallow. You can live a life without humor, you can live a life without music, you can live without love. But it is a far narrower life. A person can live without God, but it's a far more narrow life. To believe that I am a mistake, I am a random error, means essentially there's nothing truly meaningful and significant about my birth, my journey, my death. It just reduces life to something of a much smaller experience, a narrower experience. On the other hand, to live with God is very frustrating. It's challenging because most of us never really encounter God face to face and must constantly struggle to feel that He is present beneath the two layers of concealment, the Tachash layer, the Yetzer Hara, and the Tchelis layer, the body. Winston Churchill once remarked in times of war, truth is so precious, bodyguards of lies must protect it. But don't we ever graduate times of war? Must our true identity forever remain in disguise behind so many bodyguards? These are very good questions. One approach to them comes in the form of this ancient mitzvah articulated at the end of Bamidbar. You see, as long as the tabernacle remained in one place, says the Torah, there was no need for any coverings to disguise its holy contents. Only when the tabernacle needed to be transported from one place to another, it had to assume garments and coverings, and only afterwards can its journey begin. The same is true in our own personal lives. If the destiny of the human soul were to remain in one spiritual station, like the angels above us, no facades or veils would be necessary. All could be exposed, as is the case in heaven. The soul's holiness, its godliness is exposed. But the dramatic challenge presented to the human soul is to leave its stationary spiritual space and soar to a space of infinity, to leave the domain of God's light and reach into God's essence. The destiny and calling of the soul is to experience a radical metamorphosis and transformation and reach a place infinitely higher than the soul was even before it came down to the world. The soul's mission is to travel on a journey which would radically recreate it and reveal its deepest infinite potential. And this type of journey, this type of growth is only possible in the presence of veils and facades that conceal who the soul really is, because only when you fight for your soul can you discover its authentic core. Only when the soul fights for itself can it discover who it really is and what its real potential is. Only when you fight for something can you really claim it as yours. And can you even learn what it really is? So when the human soul steers at the world of darkness and declares, no, in spite of you, I shall not surrender my dignity, the infinite depth of its identity emerges. Its true sacred potential is aroused. Its true dignity comes to the fore. It encounters itself in the most profound way. So when the sanctuary was in one place, there's no coverings. When the soul is in heaven, there are no coverings. The verse in Zechariah says, you have it in your curriculum, V'nasati lecha mahalchim beina omdim ha'ela. Angels are called omdim, they're standing. They grow too, but they grow in their own orbit. They grow in their own corner, in their own cycle. Souls are called mahalchim, they're movers, because their transitions are infinite. Their journeys are infinite. Because when the sanctuary travels, here it must be covered with both layers. The layers of the body and the layers of the negative, colorful inclinations. Sometimes more layers, sometimes different layers. But usually a minimum of these two layers. And it's only through these layers, through the work of excavation, of confrontation, of fighting for your soul, where you really discover your true depth. And that's why the soul came down to this world. And yet, Aaron and his children, they were the ones who wrapped up the sanctuary into the coverings. Because there are a few souls in each generation represented by Aaron the high priest and the other Cohenites who are given the opportunity to see a fully exposed tabernacle, to taste the presence of God as we taste ice cream or sushi or spare ribs. For most of us, however, the reality of God remains shrouded, veiled. We must continuously battle and dig to feel him and serve him. But this condition is not tragic, nor is it depressing. This is the final verse in Bamidbar, which I began the class with. This you shall do for them so that they live and not die. God tells Moses and Aaron in the final verses of Bamidbar. The Cohenites shall not come. The Levites should not come and gaze as the holy items are being inserted, lest they die. What the Torah is saying is that if we were to palpably observe holiness before it was inserted into veils, we would forfeit our very mission statement and raise on the Yetra in life. For us to live, we must not see how the holiness is inserted into the veils. This is the job of Aaron and his children, the few souls who can look at this world and see God without any veils, without any curtains. But for the rest of us, the Levites, the Israelites, our contact with the holy articles is only after they have been covered up, after the soul is already in layers, because that's how we begin the journey, that transformation of the soul, allowing it to soar to a place of infinity. What makes our lives on earth so powerfully dramatic and meaningful for God, for history, for ourselves, is that only the human race has the courage to stare at darkness and see light. Good night.